If this is my last video, it is not because the story has ended. It is because the story has reached the point where repeating it becomes dangerous, boring, or useless. Every hidden system reaches a phase where explanation stops working and behavior takes over. Markets are no different. They do not collapse when the facts become unbearable. They collapse when belief quietly leaves the room. The hidden economy has always depended on delay. Delay between cause and effect. Delay between risk and recognition. Delay between what people feel and what they are told to believe. History does not move in straight lines. It coils. The same patterns return wearing different names, protected by new language, enforced by new authorities. Every cycle begins with innovation, hardens into confidence, and ends in ritual denial. What changes is not the structure, but the audience. There's a moment in every macro cycle when signals stop being debated and start being managed. Volatility becomes a narrative problem. Liquidity becomes a psychological tool. Reassurance replaces explanation. At that point, the market is no longer a discovery mechanism. It is a theater. Prices still move, but they move to preserve trust, not truth. And trust is the most expensive commodity in the system because it cannot be printed without consequences. The hidden economy is not hidden because it is secret. It is hidden because it is boring until it is fatal. It operates in balance sheets and settlement delays and promises that assume compliance will continue tomorrow the way it did yesterday. It assumes participation without conviction. It assumes people will stay because leaving feels worse than staying. That assumption holds until it doesn't, and when it breaks all at once. Every major financial turning point has looked calm right before it wasn't. Not because warning signs were absent, but because they were familiar. Familiar risks feel manageable. Repeated distortions feel normal. When a system teaches people to survive by ignoring their instincts, it eventually trains them to ignore reality itself. That is when control appears strongest, just before it dissolves. This is why the most important data is not price. It is behavior. Who is patient and who is rushed? Who is forced to act and who can wait? Who is confident enough to remain silent? The hidden economy reveals itself in what no longer needs persuasion. When incentives replace belief, stability is already compromised. There's a reason every cycle produces its own priests and heretics. The priests defend continuity. The heretics notice friction. Both believe they are rational. Both are responding to fear. The system rewards the priests until it needs a scapegoat. Then it pretends the heretics were always irresponsible even when they were early. History does not punish ignorance. It punishes timing. What people misunderstand about endings is that they do not announce themselves. They arrive disguised as fatigue, as repetition, as a sense that explanations have become circular. When the same arguments must be repeated louder, when complexity is used to silence doubt rather than illuminate it, the cycle is already aging. The hidden economy thrives in that exhaustion. It counts on people being too tired to ask new questions. If this is my last video, it is not an act of drama. It is an acknowledgement of phase change. There comes a point where adding more analysis only feeds the illusion that understanding equals safety. It does not. Understanding only tells you where you are standing when the ground starts to move. Markets do not fail because people lack information. They fail because too many people are positioned the same way for the same reasons, trusting the same exits. Liquidity vanishes not from scarcity, but from synchronization. When everyone believes they can leave later, later disappears. The hidden economy has one final trick. It convinces observers that watching is the same as acting, that awareness is the same as preparation. It keeps audiences engaged right up until engagement becomes irrelevant. At that point, silence spreads faster than panic because those who understand no longer need to speak. If this is the end, it is because the pattern no longer needs explanation. It is visible, not in headlines, not in forecasts, but in posture, in the way institutions speak carefully and individuals speak less, in the way certainty sounds rehearsed and doubt sounds expensive. Nothing truly ends. It transitions. Systems shed participants the way bodies shed heat, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. The hidden economy does not collapse on screen. It simply stops working the way people expect. And when that realization spreads, it will not feel like chaos. It will feel like inevitability. Financial collapse as a psychological event, not a market accident. When belief leaves before prices. Do financial collapse is commonly described as a violent rupture, a crash, a panic, a sudden failure of markets that appears to come out of nowhere. This framing is comforting because it suggests randomness, bad luck, or external shock. In reality, most systemic breakdowns begin long before prices fall. They begin at the psychological level, when belief quietly exits the system while participation remains. People continue to transact, invest, and comply, not because they are convinced, but because leaving feels riskier than staying. The market still functions, but only mechanically, meaning is already drained out. This distinction matters because markets are not machines in the pure sense. They are belief systems that use numbers as language. Prices are signals, but belief is the infrastructure that gives those signals credibility. When belief erodes, prices do not immediately collapse. Instead, they become curated. They are managed to preserve confidence rather than to reveal truth. This is the phase where collapse becomes inevitable, even though it remains invisible. Exhausted trust and the weight of delay. Trust rarely disappears in a dramatic moment. It erodes slowly under the weight of repeated delays between cause and effect. Risk is taken today, consequences are postponed until tomorrow, and tomorrow is endlessly deferred. Each deferral teaches participants a dangerous lesson, that time, not discipline, is the solution. Over time, trust becomes exhausted, not because people discover new information, but because they realize the same assurances are being recycled. Exhausted trust looks stable on the surface. Institutions still speak with authority. Policies are still announced with confidence. Forecasts are still delivered with precision. But underneath, trust has shifted from conviction to habit. People trust because they always have, not because the system still makes sense. This is the point at which the market becomes vulnerable, because habit collapses faster than belief. When habit breaks, there's nothing left to hold the structure together. Reassurance. Replacing truth. One of the clearest signs of an approaching breakdown is the substitution of reassurance for explanation. In healthy systems, authority explains. In fragile systems, authority reassures. Complexity is no longer used to illuminate reality, but to discourage questioning. When explanations become circular and dissent is framed as irresponsibility, the system is no longer defending truth. It is defending continuity. Reassurance feels calming in the short term, but it corrodes credibility over time. Each promise that things are under control raises the cost of being wrong. Eventually, the system must choose between admitting fragility or doubling down on certainty. History shows it almost always chooses the latter. That choice does not prevent collapse. It accelerates it by concentrating risk and synchronizing behavior. Markets. Fail from timing, not ignorance. A critical misunderstanding in financial culture is the belief that collapse happens because people lack information. In reality, most participants are aware that distortions exist. They know leverage is excessive, incentives are misaligned, and risks are being rolled forward. What they do not know is timing. They assume they will be able to react before everyone else does. This assumption fails at the system level. When too many people rely on the same exits cease to exist. Liquidity does not vanish because assets lose value. It vanishes because too many actors attempt to convert belief into certainty at the same moment. The market breaks, not because the truth is hidden, but because it is recognized too late to act on individually. Delayed consequences and moral hazard. Delayed consequences are not a side effect of modern finance. They are its central operating principle. By separating action from accountability, systems encourage risk-taking that appears rational at the individual level, but is destructive at the collective level. Each successful delay reinforces the behavior. Each bailout, intervention, or rescue teaches the same lesson. Survival is possible without correction. Over time, this creates a moral hazard that is not moral in the ethical sense, but psychological. Participants stop asking whether an action is sustainable and focus only on whether it can be extended. This shift marks the transition from a market that allocates capital to one that allocates time. When time runs out, adjustment is no longer gradual. It is sudden, the quiet exit of belief. Belief does not leave with noise, it leaves with silence. It leaves when sophisticated participants stop arguing and start preparing. It leaves when language becomes carefully neutral and commitments become shorter in duration. The public often interprets this calm as stability. In reality, it is the calm of disengagement. By the time belief is visibly gone, collapse is already underway. Prices simply catch up to psychology. What appears as a sudden shock is actually the final acknowledgement of a process that has been unfolding quietly for years. Conclusion. Collapse is recognition, not surprise. Financial collapse is not a failure of information, intelligence, or technology. It is a failure of belief management. It occurs when reassurance can no longer substitute for truth, when delayed consequences arrive faster than narratives can absorb them, and when trust is revealed to have been habit all along. Seen this way, collapse is not an accident. It is recognition. The moment when the system is forced to admit what participants already sensed but were psychologically incentivized to ignore. At moments of genuine systemic transition, numerical data becomes strangely uninformative. Prices still move, indicators still update, and models still produce outputs. Yet none of these elements capture what is actually changing. This is not because the data is wrong, but because numbers are lagging reflections of behavior, not its cause. When systems approach a turning point, behavior shifts first. The numbers follow later, often violently. Markets are conditioned to treat price as the ultimate signal. This conditioning works during normal cycles, when price discovery is relatively honest and participation is voluntary. But during late-stage systems, price loses its explanatory power. It becomes performative. Movements are designed to maintain confidence, discourage exits, or trigger predictable responses. At this stage, price is no longer a signal of value. It is a signal of intent by those who still control the levers. Price as theater, not discovery. When price becomes theater, its function changes. It is no longer meant to inform participants about risk or opportunity. It is meant to manage expectations. Sudden rallies appear during deteriorating fundamentals. Volatility is suppressed during rising fragility. Markets move in ways that feel emotionally confusing rather than analytically coherent. This theatrical pricing creates cognitive dissonance. Participants sense that something is wrong, yet the visible indicators tell them everything is fine. The longer this gap persists, the more compliance replaces conviction. People stay invested, not because they believe in the underlying system, but because leaving feels socially, professionally, or psychologically costly. The market remains intact, but belief has been replaced by inertia. Liquidity as a mechanism of control. Liquidity is often described as a neutral feature of markets, a measure of how easily assets can be bought or sold. In reality, liquidity is deeply political and psychological. It appears when it is needed to reinforce confidence and disappears when it would validate fear. In stressed systems, liquidity is not allocated evenly. It is directed strategically to preserve the appearance of stability. This selective liquidity teaches participants an important lesson. Safety is conditional. Those closest to power, information, or institutional credibility experience smooth markets. Those further away encounter friction, delays, and restrictions. Over time, this creates a hierarchy of trust. People learn not to challenge the system, but to position themselves closer to its sources of support. When liquidity becomes a tool of control, markets stop disciplining behavior. Instead, behavior is disciplined by markets. Risk is not priced, it is managed. This inversion is one of the clearest signs that a system is transitioning from market-based coordination to administrative coordination. Stability through compliance, not conviction. True stability emerges from shared conviction. Late-stage stability is maintained through compliance. Rules multiply, language becomes careful, and incentives are structured to reward conformity. Participants may privately doubt the sustainability of the system, but public dissent becomes rare. Silence increases, not because people agree, but because disagreement has become costly. This compliance creates an illusion of consensus. The absence of visible conflict is mistaken for confidence. In reality, it is often the opposite. When conviction disappears, people stop debating. They stop trying to persuade. They focus on preserving optionality and minimizing exposure. The system looks calm precisely because emotional investment has declined. Silence as information. Silence is one of the most underappreciated signals in finance. At healthy moments, markets are noisy. Opinions clash, forecasts diverge, and narratives compete. At fragile moments, voices converge or disappear. Language becomes standardized. Risk is discussed in abstract terms. Strong claims are avoided. This silence is not ignorance, it is caution. It reflects an understanding that the system is sensitive and that visible dissent could trigger consequences. The hidden economy expresses itself most clearly here, in what is not said and who stops speaking. When experienced participants reduce communication, it often means they are acting privately rather than persuading publicly. Posture and positioning. Behavioral shifts also appear in posture. Time horizons shorten. Optionality is valued more than yield. Flexibility becomes more important than optimization. These changes rarely show up in headline data, but they shape flows beneath the surface. Synchronized positioning is especially dangerous. When too many actors adopt similar defensive strategies at the same time, the system becomes brittle. Everyone believes they are being prudent individually, but collectively, they are creating the conditions for instability. When an external shock finally arrives, there's no diversity of response to absorb it. Before the breakdown is visible, by the time breakdown becomes visible in prices, behavior has already adjusted. The hidden economy has been operating for some time, reallocating risk quietly, unevenly, and asymmetrically. What appears sudden to the public is often the delayed recognition of a transition that insiders have been navigating for months or years. Understanding systemic change therefore requires learning to read behavior rather than numbers, to watch who is quiet, who is flexible, who avoids commitment, and who relies on reassurance rather than explanation. These are the true signals of transition. Conclusion: the market speaks through behavior. Systemic transitions announce themselves not through crashes, but through changes in how participants act, speak, and position themselves. Price becomes theater, liquidity becomes leverage, and stability becomes enforced rather than earned. The hidden economy is not hidden in data. It is hidden in behavior, long before the numbers finally reflect what belief already knew. Human intuition expects endings to be dramatic. We imagine alarms, headlines, and unmistakable signals that something has broken. In reality, complex systems almost never announce their own demise. They transition. They drift from one state to another quietly, often invisibly, until the old rules no longer apply. What people later call a collapse is usually just the moment when the new phase becomes undeniable. Financial, political, and social systems all share this trait. They do not fail when they are challenged, but when they are exhausted. Challenge sharpens systems. Exhaustion dulls them. By the time a system is visibly failing, it has already been operating in a degraded mode for a long time. The noise comes at the end, not the beginning. Aging systems and the loss of elasticity. Aging in systems looks different from aging in living organisms, but the logic is similar. Early in a system's life, stress produces adaptation. Late in its life, stress produces damage. The same interventions that once stabilized the structure begin to have diminishing returns. Each repair adds rigidity rather than resilience. This loss of elasticity is critical. Healthy systems bend. Fragile systems hold their shape until they snap. The outward appearance of stability can therefore be misleading. The smoother and more controlled a late-stage system appears, the less room it has left to absorb shock. Stability becomes performative, maintained through constant effort rather than organic balance. Ritual participation versus belief. One of the most telling signs of phase change is the shift from belief to ritual. Belief is active. It involves conviction, debate, and emotional investment. Ritual is passive. It involves repetition without engagement. People continue to participate because participation itself has become normalized, not because they still believe in the underlying logic. In financial systems, ritual participation appears as routine investing without enthusiasm, compliance with rules without understanding, and acceptance of narratives without curiosity. The system still functions, but it no longer inspires. That loss of inspiration matters because belief provides flexibility, ritual provides none. When participation becomes ritual, the system is no longer supported by trust, but by momentum. Momentum can sustain activity for a long time, but it cannot adapt. Once disrupted, it reverses quickly. Fatigue is a structural signal. Fatigue is often mistaken for stability. When volatility decreases, when debate quiets, when fewer people challenge official narratives, it is easy to assume that consensus has been reached. More often, fatigue has set in. Participants are tired of questioning, tired of adjusting, tired of being early and wrong. This fatigue produces a dangerous calm. Risk does not disappear, it accumulates. The system grows heavier, more complex, and more interdependent. Small disturbances that once would have been absorbed now travel further, faster. Fatigue is not the absence of stress. It is the inability to respond to it. Awareness. Without action. Awareness is frequently celebrated as protection. The idea that seeing the problem is enough to avoid it is deeply comforting. Unfortunately, awareness alone offers no defense against systemic transition. Many people are aware that systems are fragile. Many understand that valuations are stretched, incentives are distorted, and narratives are unstable. They remain exposed anyway. This is because awareness does not solve timing. Knowing that a system will change is not the same as knowing when or how. Without action, awareness becomes another form of participation, a way to remain inside the system while feeling intellectually insulated from its risks. Timing, positioning, and optionality. What distinguishes those who navigate transition successfully is not superior insight, but positioning. They reduce dependence on any single outcome. They preserve optionality. They accept lower short-term rewards in exchange for flexibility. Most importantly, they act before consensus forms, not after it breaks. Timing in this context is not precision. It is direction. It is the willingness to move when signals are ambiguous rather than waiting for confirmation. Confirmation usually arrives when exits are crowded and choices are limited. Acting before consensus dissolves. Consensus is comforting, but it is also dangerous. It provides social proof that participation is safe. When consensus dissolves, it does so rapidly. Narratives flip. Confidence evaporates. Actions that once seemed unthinkable become unavoidable. Those who wait for consensus to break are forced to react. Those who act before it dissolves have room to maneuver. This difference defines outcomes during phase transitions. The system does not reward courage after the fact. It rewards early discomfort. Conclusion. Transition is the real ending. Endings are rarely endings. They are transitions into states governed by new rules. Systems do not collapse loudly. They age quietly, fatigue internally, and shift phases when belief is replaced by ritual. Awareness without action offers no shelter. Only timing, positioning, and the willingness to move before certainty arrives allow individuals to survive and adapt.